Уважаемые коллеги,
Colleagues, I think we should start our session. So our panelists started to communicate and getting acquainted. So I expect an informative and intense session. And our session is called Mobile Future of Mobility, Prospects of Digitalization of Transport Services. I am Stanislav Natotsky, head of Transport of Moscow. So this is a branch of the Department of Transport of Moscow. So the future of mobility is becoming more and more vague because future becomes our present, and all of us feel it, especially in cities the size of Moscow, in megacities, and elements of a smart city are penetrating the transport sector, and big data, which became available to everyone, to provide us with great opportunities. And in the government of Moscow, we can quickly react to the demand, which would optimize the transportation system on a daily basis. And we are learning like the leading world's capitals. And this is a trend which is evident. And I think everyone has felt it. We had services as car sharing, and automobile is no longer an asset or a liability, but a shared item. And examples of such changes going on in our life are multiple. And transport, which we call by the term in terms of mobility, is this sector which is first to imbibe changes and innovations. And if we would talk about the future of transport, of the transport of tomorrow, that's why we are having our panelists here. I would like to introduce to you our panelists, Lady Tatiana Rechko, Deputy General Director of Renault Russia, and Leon Ritzy, Vice President of MUF'17 for Sales in Europe and EMEA. Then Semyon Panin from 2Gs, Mikhail Nokrin from Strategy Partners Group, and Alexander Polyakov, the director of the Design Institute Mosgortransnip project of the government of Moscow. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Tatiana. So actually, Renault, when I was going through your statements, so insights you will share with us will highlight the vision of car manufacturers, what the car is likely to look like in future, and how the leading car manufacturers see the future. So, Tatiana, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you for that opportunity to speak at the panel with such an exciting topic. If we would talk about mega cities and big cities which are overloaded by transportation lines, and UN statistics gives us statistics that 4 billion people will populate big cities in the next 10 years. So it's not about the load on transportways, but it's about a new era, because the trend for using a private car is going, and we have a new trend, a car as a service. And according to Konstantin see Marchetti, the comfortable time for a person to spend every day is limited by just 1 hour. Otherwise, the trip becomes a stress. So, and on this slide, you can compare to Constantin Marchetti, and people in megacities spend less time, and people in Asia and in Africa prevail. So, and this is not about underdeveloped transportation network, but because Western countries change the concept and approaches and offer a wide range of ways to support individual mobility, like car sharing, carpooling, and autonomous management. And if we would ask the modern generation, what is urban mobility for you? So modern people, young people would answer. So it is a smartphone and walking distance availability. And thanks to electronic revolution and digitalization, we have new modern geolocation methods when you can find the location of your car, and the market of services is being transformed. And we now say that car is a service. How can you make a city more efficient in terms of transportation mobility? Of course, traffic jams contribute to developing car sharing, carpooling, and road sharing. And many consultants say that 2 years ago we only had 7 million of car sharing users, so the number will grow up to 26 million by 2020. So the growth is of 4,000 users per week. And the fact that the car is connected to information system, so it provides a huge volume of data arrays which can be used by city companies and services, which will allow us to create a smart city. And automated control of a car is one of the most promising trends, and many car manufacturers says that by 2025 15% of sales would be covered by cars without a driver. And Goldman Sachs say that this percentage may grow up to 60%. And as for car pollution, electromobiles will increase efficiency, and electromobiles can be used as the main means of transportation in a city. That will allow us to create big spaces, a comfortable environment, and the use of 3 factors. So a shared use of car, electromobiles, and autonomous control would precondition comfortable existence of a user in a city.
I'd like to ask the question, have you concluded? Could you tell us, please, right now, aggregators in taxis and transit market have gained huge role, and right now there are some projects of aggregators integration with the major producer of Uber, with Mercedes. Volkswagen bought stake in Get Taxi. So perspective, this issue and your the Renault vision, how do you see the right cooperation, the combination of roles with this balance and increasing role of integrator companies and their influence on the automobile market development? You know, in France, Renault has huge number of projects connected with mayor of Paris. There are different areas Still, we are creating special platform. If talking about global Renault, there is a subsidiary in the Silicon Valley of this combined digital platform creation and integrators creation among three actors of modern market: automobile producer, digitalized platform, and the state authority. So there is a project to initiate the autonomous driving electromobility connected with a single unified electronic platform. We do think that is one of the most promising area, and we are going in this direction, and we offer these projects to the mayor and government of Moscow. We would like to initiate them in Moscow. We are participating in car sharing project, and we're interested in implementation of projects of new electromobility. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, now I'd like to give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Leon Ritze, the representative of MUF'17 company. I think that Leon is going to touch upon his vision at the future of mobility. MUF'17 company is increasing its role as a serious international player. Leon, please take the floor.
Yeah. Just a quick question. How many people in the room have heard of MUF'17 in Russia at the moment? Put your hands up if you know who MUF'17 are and if you don't. Because I'm expecting not very many hands to go up. I asked the same question literally 3 days ago, and every hand in the room went up. So in a year, I expect every hand to go up when I ask the question next time. So MUF'17, if you've heard of Waze, we are the equivalent of Waze for public transport. We're the world's biggest and leading transit or public transit app. We're currently active in over 77 countries, available in 43 languages, and covering 1,400 metro areas. So a metro area for us would be Moscow and Moscow Oblast, not just the city. Why are we the biggest? We're currently covering over 5 million stops, which is at least 50% bigger than Google. And we have at least 70% more coverage in terms of being able to plan a trip from A to B than anyone else on the market. We have direct relationships with 6,000 transit operators, and we're doing at least, it's around 250 million daily passenger reports or trips. We have a community. Now, this is the heart of future transit. We're like the Wikipedia of public transport. We have hundreds of thousands of very dedicated people that are just going onto the app and helping us to plan and correct the routes. And this is a really important part of mobility. You have to involve the community, the people that live in the city, that travel on the public transport. Now, to get to the heart of where we see the market and the vision, and where we wish to be ourselves as a company. If you look at the structure up on the panel here, you'll see basically the history of mobility. At the bottom, you have the physical infrastructure. These are the roads, the railway lines, the metro, the traditional method of moving from A to B. And of course, you're having problems now with crowding and overusage and too many people, more than were planned to use the existing infrastructure. Now, onto that, we can add the data. This is the next level, the data and the rules. The rules would be the legislation that politicians pass, the parking, the fact that you now have to pay for parking in cities, the greenification and the traffic calming, and the smart city programs that cities are starting to implement. Now, above that come the vehicles. The vehicles, and we hear an awful lot about shared mobility, car sharing, carpooling, and so forth, and obviously autonomous vehicles. But it comes right down to driving a bicycle, riding a bicycle, or driving your own personal car. So there's a whole layer of vehicles on top of that. And then the interface. Again, a lot of information, a lot of talk about interface. Now, when you look at mobility in future, think of the urban mobility stack in this manner. And one thing I'd like to stress above all is that data and rules will control them all. And whoever sits on the data will control the future of urban mobility. And this is actually where MOVE-IT will firmly be positioning itself in the coming years. A little bit about what we do and what we offer, and then I'm going to show some information around Moscow and how we're able to portray this information. We are literally capturing millions and millions and millions of trips per day of individuals moving on our platform. We're capturing them, we're analyzing them, we know whether they're walking, we know whether they're in a private car, whether they're in a shared mobility car, whether they're in a public transport. We know actually down to the level of which bus, the time of the bus, and is it late or early. And we're capturing this, we're analyzing it, we're storing it, and we're feeding it back to the cities, to the planners, to the operations people, and to the finance people. The ability to, if you can imagine, every 6 hours update an origin destination matrix for a whole city and a whole metro area, all of the origin and destinations of all the trips broken down by every mode of transport. Everybody traveling by bicycle, A to B, everybody traveling by car, and so forth, from the origin to the destination. We're capturing everything, we're storing it, and we're passing that on to cities and transit operators and other analysts. And we show basically what comes out of this is the results. Now, I'm not sure whether Mr. Polyakov will be showing anything along these lines or not. Are you going to be showing anything to do with this? Or? Yeah. But what you're looking at here is basically a comparison of Moscow versus all the other cities in the world. A comparison of cities. We can compare Moscow with any other city, and you're looking at the average commute time. The average commute time here is the whole time it takes to commute from A to B. The walking, how long it takes to wait at a stop, how long you're walking around a metro station, the full A to B commute time, not just the time you spend on a bus or a car. And actually Moscow's looking pretty good compared to some cities. I think as well that when you compare the cities on this list to the actual numbers of people that live in the city, Moscow is a megapolis. That's a result you can be very, very proud of. I'm going to very quickly now run through some other comparisons. How many people commute more than 2 hours a day? Again, Moscow is sitting in the green, looking very good. And the medium speed of complete rides. So again, Moscow is better here than, where are we going to Rome? It's not as good as London, but then London has probably half the population of Moscow and also charges to drive into the city. If you have less cars on the road, then you have less, the buses are traveling faster. Better than New York, better than Sao Paulo, which is a very equivalent city. So again, having data and sitting on the data allows you to basically have a full picture of not just current but future mobility requirements in a metro area, and using real-life transit and movement data allows you to enable the future of urban mobility. So I hope that that's just given a brief overview of what you can do nowadays, both with a transit app and the data from the transit app. Thank you.
Leon, спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Leon, for your presentation. Very interesting presentation, by the way. I paid attention to the question to you, Leon. I paid attention, then 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, I saw the first variant of your presentation. You talked about 60 million users. There is only a week. You have 70 million users. I understand that it's not a mistake. It is a very rapid development. It's a high speed of development at which the project, the company, is expanding its scale. It is growing rapidly. So what is your vision of the role of MOVE-IT, the strategy of the company? It is interesting to note that you don't have only users, you have a whole community emerging of users, those people who support. What is your vision? What is your perspective of MOVE-IT? Where are we moving to?
I mean, at the moment, yes, I have this unfortunate position that every couple of weeks I have to change my presentation and add another 5 or 10 million to the global users. We're growing at around 3 to 5 million per month on average. And this is mostly 90% through organic growth. It's word of mouth, it's people telling a friend. Very little of this is actually acquired or through marketing. And that's because we have B2C in our DNA. We absolutely live for the users of our app. To the extent that when we do the trip planner for a city, it is very, very different to a trip planner for another city. So for example, if you look at Moscow, Moscow is very, very heavy on the metro with a lot of buses feeding into the metro. Our trip planner is designed for specifically that role in Moscow. You go to London, you have a totally different configuration for public transport. So the B2C element here, being able to provide real-time choices to passengers is very, very important. And not just any passengers, all of them. If you're a disabled person in a wheelchair, you can set the settings and say, I want to go from A to B across Moscow. Please give me a wheelchair-friendly trip. And it's full mobility. It can be a combination of taxi. It can be a combination of taxi plus shared mobility. So it's a full multimodal choice. And what we're trying to do now is take the B2C solutions that we've developed in-house and break those out and offer them to cities and transit operators globally for their own uses. So white label apps, white label websites, providing APIs to the data for their internal use and so forth.
Благодарю.
Much. Dear colleagues, now I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, Semyon Panin, the representative of Double Disk company. This huge Russian developer, geoinformation system market. Please take the floor. Good afternoon one more time. My name is Semyon. I'm a representative of 2GIS company. I'm going to talk what 2GIS is. We're going to single out the main trends on the transit market in the city, and we're going to understand how these trends are going to influence the city and how we're going to support these trends. So let's start. 2GIS is offline application website with detailed information on the maps and the companies in the city. We know about 2 million businesses. In general, in Moscow, we have the information on 7,000 kilometers of main roads. I'm not talking now about the secondary roads, so we are keen on precise information. Before we go into demonstrate our data to our users, we're going to have due diligence. It's a manual, automatic approaches, different kind of approaches. Our precise data can be used by the city administration, for example, in St. Petersburg. Based on our data, there were rules created for the heavy vehicles movement. We provided data for the administration to adjust the movement on routes of law enforcement agencies, so we prevented some crimes. In Novosibirsk, in our original city, the data is going to be used for navigation of emergency services, such as ambulance and 911. Our main advantage for the users is the fact that we cover all the transport scenarios which might be required by the citizen. So we can have your route by foot, by car, by taxi, or by public transport. We know the best roads to move for it to be short, and which roads can be used and which cannot be used, where the pedestrian spaces are, and so on and so forth. Now, talking about trends. 10 years ago, when GPS receiver was integrated in smartphone, it was evolution. It reshaped the market totally. Thanks to that, navigators turned out to be possible. We started to calculate traffic jams, so the movement around city became predictable, and I'm not afraid of the word popular. Now we take it for granted, and on the forefront we can see two trends. The first trend is connected with the emergence of taxi services like Uber, Get, Taxi, and many other services. why did they influence so much? So they totally reshaped the situation. Now they are just even catching up with the public transport. In Canada, one of the cities, the municipality administration calculated that it was cheaper to pay for Uber routes compared with huge public transport park. These taxi services led up to many applications, replicating applications, for example, in the United States. For 2 years, there is Trucker Path application developing. It connects long route drivers and the freight cargo services with different mentioned companies. And the second trend is connected with the analysis of big data and the behavior of users from transport application, and so on and so forth.
So how is it done? For example, in London, there was a plan to correct the infrastructure for bicycles and to understand how to make it understandable for bikers. They took data from GPS trackers and smartphones and other devices available, and they analyzed how bikers move around the city, what roads they select, what are the attraction points, and they created a big interactive map and overlaid it over the city map, and they understood how to restructure roads where the bike parking lots should be located. So the infrastructure was completely changed. In Toronto and in Barcelona, there was an experiment based on data from transportation cards of the citizens. So they analyzed what are the most popular rules and changing points. They collected all the data and they imposed it on the existing network. They analyzed what routes are needed for the people and what could be cancelled. So as a result, Barcelona had over 100 routes. Now there are only 29 routes remaining, and they fully cover the demands of the local residents in transportations. So what should we do, and how can that influence services and consumptions? As for urban trend, of course it will reach other adjacent industries. It influenced cargoes by like motor transport, and we're waiting for the moment when the market of cargo transportation will change. So we integrated data from different taxi companies into our service, and we would like to do the same for applications focused on cargo transportations. And the second important trend is that we will continue to analyze behavior of users and analyze data which we get from the transportation applications. Every second we get a lot of data from our users, as we heard from the representatives of MUF'17. And we also know what points you select in the city, what are your favorable routes where you spend time in traffic jams, what are your normal routes. And we can analyze the data, and together with the city authorities we can overlay them on the city map, and we try to understand where we can have road junctions, which street can be a pedestrian or which would ruin the entire transportation system in the city. Just to summarize, it's quite obvious that the situation is changing and we shouldn't turn a blind eye on it. And we are now getting huge amount of data because we have a growing number of smartphone users and much more people use public transport, and we start to understand our citizens better. So if city authorities and businesses unite, and if they start to analyze data and apply them to the city map, we will be able to make our cities more comfortable in at least 5 years. And we are open for cooperation, and we do everything possible, and we hope it will be a useful experience for us all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Simon. A very interesting presentation, and I was really amazed that while I was putting down my next question, I was getting an answer in a minute. So, very informative, and you touched upon a wide range of topics. But my question is, so you actively cooperate with Russian regions, as I understand. But as for the real practice, how regional authorities treat your proposals? You have a lot of reasonable things, but are Russian regions really ready to accept your ideas? Is your work productive? Or do you have some blocks where you are successful, and maybe there are other blocks where the cooperation is quite slow? Because I understand that, of course, your company can implement your solutions in places where local smart transport city fails to collect the required volume of data, or maybe it lacks the required sources for data collection. So please, could you answer it briefly? So, in general, the answer, you are right. Our interaction with the regions is quite active. We provide data to different city administrations at different bases. And the problem appears to be that our urban administrations don't quite feel the advantage of analyzing data. And we need to render this information to them just to make the use of it clear. So this is not an all-round and ubiquitous practice. So that's why there are some blocking points in urban administration, because they cannot study previous cases, or sometimes they fail to fully understand the experience. However, I believe we are moving in the right direction. The dynamics is positive, and over time, in the nearest future, there will be the tide will turn, and we will see trends which are modern. You cannot ignore. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mikhail Nokhrin, the director of Strategy Partners Group. Mikhail is our partner for a long period of time, and we cooperated in a number of projects. And Mikhail has a deep understanding of how Moscow lives. Thank you, Stanislav. But before, I would like to share my observations about that important mobility trend. I would like to ask our audience, so please, I would like to ask you to raise your hands for those who use your automobile to move in the city, your private car. Raise your hands, please. And who uses public transportation mainly? Okay. Taxi? Less people? Bikes? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. The sampling is quite equal. We have more or less equal groups. I would like to tell you how to make the public transportation more popular. The 10 people who raised your hand saying that they use cars. So maybe the trend I will tell you about will change your attitude. So mobility as a service, integrating en route and other types of public transportations. What's good about an automobile? You go from the door to the door. You understand the route. You go to the destination point. As for the public transportation, so it lacks that functionality. So it follows a route, and quite often you need to walk the first mile and to walk the last mile by this or that way. And of course, it's complicated to use different types of transportation. So for taxi, you use Uber or Get. For public transportation, you use the application by the government of Moscow or Move It. And car sharing is a new concept, and it combines on route and other types of transportations, and you get the quality of a private car in public transportation. And we have a number of examples in different countries. So any combinations from bicycle to tram, it can be offered by a platform, and it's the use of such an application makes your experience much more attractive. For instance, in Hanover, you have HVK. So every second user in Hanover decided not to buy a second car for his wife or for his children, because the combinations of en route and other types of transportations proved to be more efficient. The way it should work in an ideal world, you need to combine 4 cycles of a trip. So stage number 1 is authorization, your private account with information about your private preferences, your locations, and your personal wallet. The next stage is number 1, the first click. When you set the starting and destination point, then there is like booking, selecting different modalities. And the last stage is payment. You don't have that closed loop cycle, but in my experience, we checked like several dozens of startups and applications, but all of them miss payment. Or if you're focused on payment, you lack private data at authorization stage. And I believe this will be implemented in a couple of years, and we will get platforms which will combine very different types of transportation, like metro and taxi. And once you are out of the metro station, there is a taxi waiting for you to take you to the door of your destination point, and you have a better experience compared to the car. So I will try to extend it. So normally with a private car, you need to stop at the starting point or at the destination point, and these points are stored by the parking application or by the navigator, and these data are a good source for analyzing the statistics. So when you analyze, you can get a future platform which will offer you a better route, which will show you how much time and how much money you spend a month that you impact environment, and the lack of activity adds certain kilos of your body weight. But if you use this or that combination, you can save in case you select an appropriate route. And in that case, a car driver would start to use public transportations and get additive value, which everyone can use, both people that use public transports and startups which can earn real money, and the city, because the comfort is growing. Another situation, a person who is not using a car, what can happen to him? at a certain point of time he would like to decide and buy a car. So to avoid it, we need to continuously improve the quality of service. So on different routes and different modalities, there are totally different combinations. And as for me, I'm a car addict. I'm driving for 8 years. And since I started to investigate this topic, I started to spend at least 3 days a week in public transportations. So when I key in my route in my favorite mobile applications, so I analyze whether to drive a car today, or maybe I can go into a metro and then I would take a taxi. Well, my last slide. This should all be accompanied with a good instruction, a guideline, step by step. It should be convenient to you. You shouldn't need to have the painful choice, like with a car. Once you are behind the wheel, you go. And in the public transport, you know what car you should get on. So for the public transportation user, you need to have a number of diagrams, modalities. It should be customized for your circumstances. Whether you have a driving license and if you can use car sharing, if you are ready to use your own bicycle or a hired bike, and the statistics should be very convenient for you.
In conclusion, a couple of recommendations for Moscow and Moscow-like cities. Creating a platform, and a colleague from Move It, I would recommend or ask why the application doesn't have the car route for the person to understand that the car is worse, so he needs to compare at one place that car is worse. Without this option, without the option of to compare, to have the route on the private car, and without it, it's difficult to compare. The second recommendation is to adjust personal peculiarities. Someone moves around in a suit, someone means in casual things. It should be customized to a particular person. I hope that we're going to see a one-click payment option when going to be a single wallet to pay for taxi, bikes and public transport. I'm waiting for that. And I think that the Department of Transport will give these opportunities in a year or two. Thank you very much, Mikhail. I think that our next step is going to be that the strategic partners is going to produce their ideal platform, or together with... may I ask Leon one question? I'm going to give the floor to Alexander Polikov as we are out of time. Please give the clicker to Alexander. Just brief introduction to Alexander. Now he's the head of Project Institute of Moscow NIA project. One of the key tasks is to integrate and develop big data in Moscow. And prior to that, Alexander was the deputy head of the road movement, and he was responsible for the development of intellectual transport system in Moscow, which now is proved to be one of the best in the world. Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you for your introduction. I'm going to be brief. How much time do I have? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Can you give me 5? Okay, 4. 4 is the option. I would be pessimistic a bit. Who raise hands? Who uses cars? Who use bikes? Who use public transport? Somehow you are pedestrians. So why do I say this? I'm saying, Tatiana has mentioned already that the pedestrian reach of car sharing on automobile for the transport to any destination, we need to move either by foot or to have our full route by foot. Why do I say this? As the evolution is going in spiral. People many years ago, many centuries ago, used to eat by hands, and then they started to use forks. Now who work in Silicon Valley, all those guys who don't have time, they still use their hands to eat, so they are winning the vote. So 5,000 years ago, mobility was measured by steps, and then we increased and we created wheel, and it was measured by the route where you could move by horse. All the cities were located within the 24 hours movement by horse. It's about 60 to 70 kilometers, but those were if you take the old map of the world, so the cities were connected like this. Then we started to measure the time, the length of mobility by the time. So how much time you require to move from St. Petersburg to Moscow, whether it required 1 day, 2 days. Now we see that the comfortable time is not more than 1 hour when it goes to commuting. Now we go back to the situation that more and more we are becoming pedestrians, expressed in digitalization, and we have limits in time, so we're more and more becoming pedestrians. I'm going to switch my slides. May I ask somebody to switch? Could you switch on the next slide, please? Okay. Here I would like to talk about one case. I was familiar with some projects which the guys are doing. It's quite great that Moscow is 5 minutes difference with the world leader Berlin, as far as I remember. There's 62 minutes, we have 67 minutes, and it is a good indicator. We suggest another indicator which would assess how slower, based on movie data, for instance, how slower the public transportation is becoming in rush hours. So we do understand the importance of rush hour movement. In other time, it is quite controversial. On Sunday, maybe car is going to be popular, but we need to take a look at the situation at length. But in rush hours, public transportation is faster, and how slow it is becoming. We have separate lanes, the frequency of metro, trains, different infrastructural project. We calculated in Moscow data. It is slower by 11% compared with rush hours when you use a car, and compared rush hours with non-rush hours. If you use a car in rush hours, you are significantly slower. If you use public transport, you spend just 11% more time when you in rush hour. So talking about Renault cars and so on and so forth, BMW says that we do not produce carriage to move people, we create infrastructure for mobility. What is infrastructure of mobility is for pedestrians particularly? Now we have created the complex system of organization of road movement, which has digitalization. Every sign is geo-linked. Fences are geo-linked to this platform. Why not use this information, the platform for autonomous movement of cars? Why do pedestrians need to see the 40 kilometers per hour sign, for example? It's supposed to be in navigator and limit particular movement. Why do we put on stack in cities in different information and not usable? So I have some signs to wrap up, talking about navigation, double GIS. So wherever we move, smartphone is very important, but I would like to say that what the Institute is doing, what the pedestrian faces, you know, your battery is low. Just the navigation should be comfortable, and not just in cars, but for pedestrians there's supposed to be some signs around the city which should demonstrate how fast he can get to this or that destination. And next point, what Mikhail has mentioned to conclude, mass mobility services, that is a trend which connects different aspects and give a balanced decision and solutions in other respects. So now I'm to wrap up. I hope that I'm going to have questions. We're going to speak about them a little bit later. Dear colleagues, I thank you for your attention. I thank our speakers for participation. Very interesting presentations. Good luck at the second day of the forum. Enjoy.